The blade fell with the precision of prayer. On the great temple of Tenochtitlan, beneath the blazing sun of 1487, a priest stood over a living human heart. Around him, 80,000 witnesses held their breath. The god demanded feeding, and Mexico, the heart of the Aztec world, would answer. This wasn't murder. This was the mathematics of survival. Without these deaths, the sun would refuse to rise. The world would fall into darkness, and all of creation would end. For centuries, the Aztec Empire had perfected a system of spiritual terror so vast, so intricate, so absolutely necessary in their eyes that it consumed thousands of human lives every year. Not in cruelty for its own sake, but in desperate faith that blood alone could hold back chaos. This is the story of how an empire rationalized the unthinkable, transformed murder into cosmology, and built a civilization on the conviction that death was the only path to salvation. Before we descend into this blood-soaked mythology, subscribe so you never miss the next untold chapter from history's darkest archives. Now, let us step into the temple. The Aztecs believed the universe operated on a principle they called Nextloelistliver, debt of the gods. According to their cosmology, the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. They had poured their own blood into existence. The fifth sun, the current age, was made possible only through divine assimilation, and humanity, in turn, owed a debt that could only be paid in blood. Without sacrifice, without this constant feeding, the sun would grow weak. It would refuse to rise. Darkness would consume the earth. Humanity would perish. This wasn't theological debate. It was existential mathematics. The Aztecs had observed the patterns of the cosmos. They had seen the sun climb the sky each morning only through their ritual feeding. To them, the correlation was undeniable. Stop the sacrifices, and the sun stops moving. End the ceremony, and creation collapses. In their understanding, they weren't murderers. They were the maintenance workers of reality itself. They held back chaos through blood. The man who would orchestrate the largest sacrifice ceremony in Aztec history was Ahuitzotl, the 8th emperor. He ruled from 1486 to 1502, a period of Aztec expansion so aggressive, so thorough, that it bordered on the apocalyptic. His empire stretched across Mexico, tributaries feeding the capital with food, goods, and most critically captives. When Ahuitzotl commissioned the rededication of the great temple of Tenochtitlan in 1487, he intended to demonstrate Aztec power to all conquered peoples, to show that Mexico the city was the cosmic center where heaven and earth intersected, to prove that the gods preferred the Aztecs above all other nations. And to accomplish this, he would conduct a sacrifice ceremony on a scale never before attempted. The priests began preparations months in advance. Thousands of captives were gathered from every conquered province. Warriors, soldiers, criminals, and slaves, collected like offerings to be given to the gods. They were held in the Tecpilcalay, the temple's holding cells, fed, but kept isolated from the outside world. Many went mad in the darkness, their minds fragmenting as they waited for death. Some clung to hopes of reprieve. Others drank themselves into numbness on pulque, the fermented agave drink, their last escape from consciousness. The ceremony itself would last for days, for nights and days of continuous bloodletting. The priests calculated that 80,000 human hearts would be needed. Not 80, not 800. 80,000. Contemporary accounts, recorded by Spanish conquistadors who witnessed it decades later, still seem almost incredulous. How could so many bodies be processed? How could priests maintain focus through such systematic slaughter? How could an empire not collapse under the psychological weight of so much death? And yet, they did it. The temples of Tenochtitlan were designed like abattoirs, disguised as holy places. Each temple had a tekpantlia, sacrificial stone positioned precisely. A team of priests would be positioned at each stone. The processional pathways between temples were designed to move captives efficiently from holding cells to execution platforms. This was industrial-scale ritual. This was mass production dedicated to cosmic preservation. The first night, the ceremonies began. The captives were stripped and painted with chalk. They were given herbs and pulque to dull their awareness. Priests, dressed in the skins of previous sacrificial victims, flayed human skin worn as sacred vestments, led the condemned up the temple steps. The crowds below witnessed it all. The Aztec nobility, the warriors, the common people, all gathered to watch. At the temple apex, a priest would place one captive on the tekpantli, for assistant priests would hold the victim's limbs. Then, the high priest would draw out an obsidian blade, a knife so sharp it made steel look dulled, make a precise incision in the chest. The heart would be extracted before the body even understood it was dying. It would be offered to the sun, held aloft, still beating. Then, the corpse would be tumbled down the temple steps. The body would be stripped of its skin. The head would be severed and placed on a skull rack. But dampantly, during the 4-day ceremony, this happened continuously. Wave after wave, captive after captive. The sounds were never silent. The smell of blood, of death, of opened bodies hung over the city like a fog. Blood pooled on the temple stones. Blood ran down the steps. The priests' robes became drenched in blood so thoroughly that removing them required assistance. The psychological experience of the captives defies modern comprehension. Imagine being held in a dark cell for weeks, knowing death is coming, unable to predict the exact moment, then being stripped, painted, drugged, and forced to climb steps while 50,000 people watch. Being held down by priests in flayed human skin. Feeling the blade enter your chest, understanding in your final seconds that you are dying to keep the sun alive, that your death has cosmic significance. Some captives went willingly. Warriors captured in battle could achieve honor through sacrifice. To die on the sacrificial stone was, in their belief system, glorious. These warriors would march to the temples with their heads high, singing songs of honor. They had no hope of escape, but they had the opportunity to die with dignity. Others fought. Records describe captives who resisted, who tried to break free, who screamed prayers to their own gods. The priests would subdue them violently, but resistance was futile. The machinery was built to process death. The Aztecs had developed an entire economy around war. They conducted flower wars, exioiate ritualized conflicts, fought specifically to capture enemies for sacrifice. These weren't wars of conquest. They were hunting expeditions dressed as military campaigns. Enemy warriors were captured alive, then transported to Tenochtitlan, where they would eventually climb the temple steps. This created a perverse system where neighboring states understood that if they fought the Aztecs, their soldiers would be sacrificed. Yet some continued to resist, because the alternative was vassalage and the obligation to contribute captives to Aztec ceremonies. They fought anyway, knowing the outcome, because fighting maintained agency. The victims weren't random. The Aztecs preferred warriors. They preferred young men in their prime. The system developed elaborate justifications. The gods preferred strong hearts, young hearts, hearts from enemies defeated in battle. The ideology created a framework where sacrifice became not just necessary, but discriminating. The priests who performed the sacrifices developed a kind of professional detachment. They were men of learning. They understood astronomy. They could calculate the movements of stars and planets. Yet they channeled all that knowledge into the service of sacrifice. They were theologians who had rationalized mass murder into cosmic necessity. Some priests became famous for their technique, their ability to extract a heart without hesitation, their precision with the obsidian blade. They developed a culture of expertise around killing. They trained younger priests in the methods. They wrote instructions in pictographic codices explaining the proper angle of incision. Killing became a craft. Sacrifice became a discipline. Archaeological evidence suggests the Aztecs developed sophisticated systems for processing the dead. Bodies were stripped. Useful body parts were distributed, hearts to the gods, blood to the temples, some flesh to be consumed in ritual cannibalism. The skull would go to the Tenochtitlan, the skull rack. The efficiency of this system speaks to how normalized the process had become. The consumption of sacrificial victims was deeply symbolic rather than sustenance-based. Warriors who had captured the sacrificed victim would eat small portions of the flesh as a way of absorbing the captive's strength. By consuming the enemy, they believed they were taking possession of the enemy's power and cosmic significance. Imagine being a subject state of the Aztec Empire. Every year, you were required to send tribute, food, goods, and young people for sacrifice. Your children disappeared into the machinery of Tenochtitlan. They climbed the temple steps. They became blooded. This created a permanent state of terror. It ensured obedience through the threat of sacrifice. It locked conquered populations into subordination through fear. Yet the system began to destabilize. The Aztecs expanded so aggressively that they created a network of resentful, conquered states. These states paid tribute not from loyalty, but from fear. They harbored secret hatred. They resented the constant drain. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in 1519, they found an empire surrounded by potential allies waiting to rebel. The Spanish conquistadors were horrified by Aztec sacrifice. They reported witnessing ceremonies where hundreds died in a single day. They described the blood-soaked temples. To them, Aztec sacrifice represented a civilization that had descended into demonic barbarism. Yet, the Aztecs saw their sacrifice system as civilized. It was theology. It was mathematics. It was the price of cosmic maintenance. To them, not sacrificing would have been barbaric and abdication of responsibility to the gods and to the universe. The temples are silent now. The great temple of Tenochtitlan was destroyed after the Spanish conquest. The stones were repurposed into colonial buildings. The skull racks were dismantled. The machinery of sacrifice was broken. Today, the Templo Mayor sits beneath Mexico City, partially excavated, partially reconstructed. Tourists walk through it casually. Few fully grasp what happened on those stones. Few understand the ideology that made it possible. Few confront the reality that a sophisticated civilization believed human sacrifice was the price of continued existence. The Aztec sacrifice system raises uncomfortable questions about civilization itself. How did a civilization convince itself that mass murder was cosmic necessity? What does that tell us about the fragility of moral reasoning when it is sufficiently wrapped in ideology? If this exploration of one of history's most unsettling practices has disturbed you, it should leave a comment below. Tell us what you think about how entire societies can normalize the unthinkable through belief systems. And if you want more untold stories from history's darkest corridors, subscribe now and join us as we uncover the hidden chapters that civilizations tried to bury. The stones still remember. and some debts, perhaps, can never be paid.